The joke slipped out so casually that I barely noticed the damage it caused. I laughed and shrugged, telling a coworker that my roommate knew absolutely nothing about love. I believed it with complete confidence. She never dated, never talked about romance, never chased attention, and never seemed interested in the fairy tales everyone else spent their lives pursuing. I thought she had built invisible walls around her heart so high that nothing could ever climb over them. But before that ordinary afternoon was over, one quiet act of compassion shattered everything I thought I understood about love, about sacrifice, and about the extraordinary strength hidden inside people the world too easily overlooks. That if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances, please take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, share it with someone who could use a little hope today, and subscribe to our channel to become part of our growing community. My name is Garrett, and for nearly 2 years I had shared a modest apartment with a woman named Tessa. We had met through a rental listing after both of us had gone through difficult financial setbacks. The arrangement had always been practical. We divided bills, respected each other's privacy, and somehow built an easy friendship without ever becoming deeply involved in one another's personal lives. Tessa worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic. Every morning she left before I did, carrying the same worn canvas bag and wearing the same calm expression that never seemed to change whether life was treating her kindly or harshly. I worked as a graphic designer whose projects constantly shifted between deadlines and disappointment. While I often complained about clients, traffic, or money, Tessa rarely complained about anything. Because she was so quiet, I invented stories about her without realizing it. I assumed she had never experienced real love because she never talked about it. I mistook silence for emptiness. Looking back, that may have been the greatest mistake of my life. The afternoon everything changed began with sunshine spilling through the office windows. My co-workers had gathered around the break room discussing relationships. One of them asked whether my roommate was dating anyone. I laughed and said she probably didn't even know what love looked like. Everyone chuckled, and the conversation drifted elsewhere. I forgot about the comment almost instantly. When I returned home later that day, I found our apartment unusually quiet. Tessa sat at the kitchen table surrounded by neatly organized paperwork. Beside her rested several envelopes, a small wooden jewelry box, and an old photograph whose edges had faded with time. She looked up with a gentle smile that carried more exhaustion than happiness. That I apologized for interrupting, but she simply nodded and returned to sorting the papers. Something about the careful way she handled every document made me curious. I asked if everything was all right. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she quietly explained that the rehabilitation center where she worked had recently learned one of their youngest patients would lose access to a specialized treatment program because the family could no longer afford transportation or additional therapy sessions not covered by insurance. The little boy had survived a devastating accident, and every week of therapy meant another chance to walk independently again. That I listened politely, assuming she was simply sharing a difficult day at work. Then she opened the jewelry box. Inside lay a delicate silver necklace, a vintage watch, and a ring that looked far older than anything else she owned. She calmly explained that she was preparing to sell every valuable possession she had. That I stared at her in disbelief. The necklace had belonged to her grandmother, the watch had belonged to her father, the ring had once belonged to her mother. She intended to sell them all before the weekend. That I couldn't understand why anyone would willingly give away the last physical reminders of their family for someone they had only known professionally. That was when Tessa gently corrected the belief I had carried for years without ever saying a single word of accusation. She told me that love was never measured by how loudly someone expressed it. Love was measured by what someone was willing to give without expecting anything in return. Her words settled into the silence between us with astonishing weight. For the first time since becoming roommates, she shared pieces of her past. She had grown up in a small coastal town where her parents devoted their lives to helping others despite having very little themselves. Her father repaired neighbors' homes without charging money whenever families faced hardship. Her mother cooked meals for elderly residents every weekend. Neither of them believed generosity required wealth. They believed compassion required courage. When Tessa was in college, both of her parents were killed in a highway accident during a volunteer trip delivering supplies after severe flooding. Overnight she inherited not money but memories, values, and a handful of treasured family keepsakes. The jewelry box represented almost everything she had left. She had promised herself she would never sell those items, until now. As she described the little boy struggling through painful therapy sessions with a smile that refused to disappear, she quietly admitted the promise no longer mattered as much as giving him another chance at a normal childhood. My chest tightened with shame. Only hours earlier I had joked that she knew nothing about love. Now I realized she understood it more deeply than anyone I had ever met. The following afternoon I secretly contacted several friends and co-workers. Without telling Tessa, I explained the situation. Most contributed something, even if it was only a few dollars. Others offered transportation, fundraising ideas, or professional connections. What surprised me wasn't the money itself but how quickly kindness spread once someone took the first step. Within 2 days, our small apartment transformed into the headquarters of an unexpected community effort. Local businesses donated supplies for a charity event. Artists offered paintings. Bakers donated desserts. Musicians volunteered to perform during an outdoor fundraiser held in a nearby public park under bright afternoon skies. Tessa resisted being the center of attention. She insisted the story wasn't about her. She was right. It became about everyone discovering they were capable of loving strangers more than they ever imagined. The fundraiser exceeded every expectation. Families arrived carrying folding chairs and picnic blankets. Children played across the grass while volunteers organized activities. The atmosphere felt less like a charity event and more like neighbors rediscovering one another. By late afternoon enough donations had been collected not only to cover the young patient's therapy but to establish a community assistance fund for several other families facing similar challenges. When the clinic director announced the total, tears quietly filled Tessa's eyes. She never sought recognition. She simply stood among the crowd with humble gratitude while dozens of people applauded, not because she had asked for help, but because her example reminded everyone what genuine compassion looked like. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to ordinary routines, yet something inside me had permanently changed. I stopped measuring people by how expressive they were. I began paying attention to the quiet ways people loved others, the neighbor who shoveled snow from elderly driveways, the cashier who secretly paid for groceries when someone's card was declined, the teacher who bought school supplies without telling anyone, the nurse who stayed past her shift simply because a frightened patient needed someone nearby. Love had always surrounded me. I simply hadn't recognized its language. One bright afternoon several months later, the little boy visited our apartment carrying a handmade thank you card decorated with uneven hearts and colorful crayon drawings. He walked carefully, still supported by a brace, but every determined step reflected countless hours of therapy made possible by strangers who chose compassion over indifference. He handed Tessa the card with a smile that needed no explanation. She cried quietly. So did I. Not because sadness remained, but because hope had become visible. Eventually Tessa received every family keepsake back. The fundraiser organizers had quietly tracked down the buyer after learning what she had sacrificed. Moved by the story, the buyer returned every item without accepting repayment. When the wooden jewelry box returned to our kitchen table one sunny afternoon, it felt like kindness completing a full circle. Some gifts leave your hands only to return carrying even greater meaning. As for me, I never forgot the careless joke that had started everything. It taught me how dangerous assumptions can be. We often believe the loudest people love the hardest. Sometimes the deepest love belongs to those who never feel the need to announce it. Years later, whenever someone claimed another person seemed cold or incapable of caring, I remembered Tessa quietly preparing to give away her family's greatest treasures for a child who wasn't related to her by blood, obligation, or expectation. That memory became my answer, because love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it sits silently across a kitchen table, willing to lose everything so someone else can keep hope alive. Before this story comes to a close, I'd love to hear from you. Please leave a meaningful comment sharing whether you believe the greatest acts of love are often the quiet ones that no one else notices. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. As sunlight poured through the apartment windows that final afternoon, the little wooden jewelry box rested safely where it belonged, not because precious things can never be lost, but because kindness has a remarkable way of bringing people and sometimes even treasured memories back home. I learned that day that love is not defined by romance, grand speeches, or perfect endings. It lives in sacrifice, grows through compassion, survives heartbreak, and quietly changes every life it touches. And every time I think back to the joke that once made me laugh, I remember the woman who proved me wrong instantly, not with words, but with a heart so generous that it forever changed my understanding of what love truly means.